right, so we've got a stack of articles and videos here all about healthcare. And we're diving in to see if maybe, just maybe, some of that common medical advice we hear, isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Right. Love it.
We're starting with this title. Oh my gosh, this title. I will get attacked for this.
Okay.
It's a YouTube video by this health expert, Merlin. And let me tell you, that title alone had me hooked.
Just a tad provocative.
All right. So he's all about food as medicine, but
I like him already.
He's also calling out the pharmaceutical industry. Says they've got a bit too much influence on,
Interesting.
healthcare in general.
Yeah. That's a perspective we should definitely examine more closely.
For sure. So Merlin jumps right in and starts debunking what he calls these 9 big medical myths, things doctors tell us all the time.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Myth number 1, he starts with the gallbladder.
Okay.
Now, I always thought it was super important.
Right.
But Merlin says, some folks think you don't actually need it.
Well, it's true. You could live without your gallbladder.
Right.
And this is but it plays a vital role. It stores bile, which helps break down fats when you're digesting.
Oh, right.
So it's not that it's useless, but you can survive without it.
Okay, that makes sense. And I remember Merlin suggesting, if it has been removed, taking bile salts could be helpful.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. And it kind of speaks to a bigger theme here, this idea of getting to the root of the problem.
Yes.
Instead of just chopping off the symptom.
Yeah, love that approach. Addressing the root cause. Okay, this next myth, this one really got me thinking. Yep. Statins. Those cholesterol-lowering drugs, we hear all the time about how they've got minimal side effects, right?
Right.
Merlin says, hold on a minute, not the whole story.
Okay, so I'm listening.
He lists some pretty scary potential side effects. Muscle problems, higher risk of diabetes, even liver damage.
He's right to highlight those. Those are real side effects. They can be serious for some people.
And his view is, if you're generally healthy, just giving someone statins without, even trying lifestyle changes first. Or figuring out why their cholesterol is high in the first place.
Yeah.
It's like slapping a Band-Aid on I don't know.
Right, it's not getting to the root of the issue.
Exactly. It's address the root cause. Maybe the statins aren't even necessary.
But all about that risk-benefit analysis,
yeah.
Right. You have to weigh the potential benefits against the potential downsides.
Exactly. Okay, get ready for this next one, because it's a good one. High blood pressure equals too much salt.
Oh, yeah. We've all heard that one.
Right, etched in stone. But Merlin throws a curveball. He says it's way more complicated than that. He's all about potassium.
Interesting.
Says it can actually help regulate blood pressure.
He's definitely onto something. It's not just about sodium. It's about the balance of sodium and potassium.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that.
Potassium basically tells your kidneys, hey, get rid of that extra sodium, which, boom, lowers blood pressure.
Wow. So what, bananas, avocados, those are good for potassium?
Exactly. Fruits and vegetables, it all comes back to that food as medicine concept,
Right. It all ties together. Okay, brace yourself, because Merlin gets passionate about vitamin D. Doctors, they recommend 600, 800 IUs?
Yeah, somewhere in that range, usually.
Merlin's suggesting at least 10,000.
Wow, that's quite a difference.
Right. And obviously people worry about toxicity at higher doses, but Merlin argues that, hey, 10,000 IUs is nothing compared to how much vitamin D our bodies make from just being out in the sun.
It's a complex issue for sure. Vitamin D is so important for so many things.
It's true. It really is.
I think the takeaway here is it's worth having a conversation with your doctor.
Yeah.
Figure out what your levels are and what's right for you.
Absolutely. Get those levels checked. Okay, time to tackle a medical myth that's practically carved in stone. Red meat is bad for you.
Here we go.
Merlin says, not so fast.
What's interesting here is he's not saying all red meat is created equal.
Right. It's all about that grass-fed life, right?
It's exactly. Grass-fed versus conventionally raised, big difference.
He rattles off all these benefits. Quality protein, B vitamins, zinc, iron, even creatine.
It's true. When sourced properly, grass-fed red meat can be incredibly nutrient-dense.
And speaking of demonized foods, get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about. Saturated fat.
Hold on.
Merlin does not buy into the idea that all saturated fat is bad. He really challenges that.
What's fascinating is that he points the finger at unhealthy, unsaturated fats, like those seed oils we've been hearing so much about, and processed foods as the real culprits when it comes to inflammation.
It really makes you wonder, how much of what we believe about nutrition is, actually backed by science versus...
What?
Well, versus industry influence, like who benefits from us thinking a certain way about certain foods? It makes you think.
It's a valid question for sure. We should always be questioning and looking deeper.
Okay, one last myth from Merlin's video before we move on, and it's a big one. Lose weight to get healthy. So Merlin's like, nope, not buying it. He says weight is often a symptom of a bigger problem.
I like that perspective. It's not always as simple as calories in, calories out.
Right. It could be something like insulin resistance.
Which, by the way, he ties back to those refined carbs, sugars, and seed oils we were just talking about.
Of course. It always circles back, doesn't it?
It really does.
So his point is, address the root problem, like insulin resistance, and often the weight takes care of itself.
Makes sense. If your body's constantly dealing with blood sugar spikes and crashes, it's going to be hard to maintain a healthy weight.
Can you quickly explain insulin resistance for our listeners? I feel like that term gets thrown around a lot.
Sure. So insulin resistance is basically when your cells don't respond properly to insulin. Insulin's job is to help your body use glucose for energy, but when your cells become resistant, it can't do its job effectively, leading to a buildup of glucose in your blood.
I see. So that's a whole other can of worms.
It can be, and it's linked to a whole host of health problems.
Wow, this is all making me rethink my snack choices. But before we raid the pantry, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with more myth-busting, including one that really makes you question the whole plant-based is always healthier thing.
Ooh, that's a good one. Can't wait to dig into that.
Back again. More myth-busting with Merlin. And man, this next one.
Lay it on me.
Plant-based. It's always healthier, right? That's what we hear all the time. But Merlin's like, hold up. Not so fast.
Yeah, that plant-based debate, it can get a little heated.
No kidding. But he's not saying veggies are bad, obviously. Yeah. It's more like, just because something is plant-based
doesn't automatically make it the holy grail of health.
Exactly. Like those plant-based meat alternatives. Have you seen the ingredients on some of those things?
Some of them are like a science experiment gone wrong,
Right. Merlin's point is, don't just blindly follow the plant-based label. Look at what's actually in the food.
Read those labels, people. And remember, the most nutrient-dense foods, they usually don't need an ingredient list.
It's true. They speak for themselves. Okay, last myth from this video, and it's a real head-scratcher. Hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. Merlin says it's a complication of diabetes.
Wait, so low blood sugar.
Yeah.
But diabetes is high blood sugar, right?
Exactly. It seems counterintuitive. And Herlin's like, if high blood sugar is the problem, shouldn't the focus be on lowering glucose through diet?
Instead of relying on medication that could then lead to low blood sugar.
Right. It's like, are we just creating a whole new problem by trying to fix the first one?
It's a valid question. It really makes you think about the whole approach to managing diabetes,
For sure. Merlin really threw a lot our way with that video, but we've got one more source to dive into today.
Bring it on.
Shifting gears now from, what we eat to, medical errors.
Oh, that's a heavy one.
Yeah. We've got this CNBC article titled, Medical Errors, Third Leading Cause of Death in America.
Wow.
And they're not messing around. That title, it's unfortunately very real.
I've heard that statistic before, and it's always so shocking.
Right. We think of hospitals as places of healing.
As they should be.
But this article, it really highlights that, like any system, there's always room for error.
And in healthcare, those errors can have, life or death consequences.
Exactly. The article cites a study from Johns Hopkins. They estimated over 250,000 deaths every year in the U.S. due to medical errors.
250,000? That's more than I thought.
I know, it's staggering. In some reports, they put that number even higher.
It's tough to track, right? There's not always a clear box to check on a death certificate for medical error.
And, there's probably some reluctance to even admit when these things happen.
Absolutely. It's understandable, but it also makes it hard to get an accurate handle on the problem.
For sure. To make this really hit home, the article tells the story of Emily Jerry.
Oh, no.
She was only 2 years old.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
She was battling cancer, and it was supposed to be her last chemo treatment.
Oh, my God.
But the pharmacy technician, they made a mistake with her IV bag. The sodium chloride dose was 20 times higher than it should have been.
And this poor little girl already fighting for her life.
It's just devastating. And it makes you realize that even a seemingly small error,
it can have catastrophic consequences.
Exactly. And while it's easy to, point fingers in these situations, the article really emphasizes that it's often systemic issues that are at the root of these errors.
Makes sense. We're talking about human beings, right? People get tired, they get overwhelmed, systems get strained.
Right. And the article talks about things like understaffing. If hospitals are short-staffed,
It puts so much pressure on the staff they do have. Leads to exhaustion, burnout, which can lead to mistakes.
And then there's inadequate training, communication breakdowns between different healthcare providers.
Especially when you have patients seeing multiple specialists. It's so important that everyone is on the same page.
Absolutely. It's like we need better communication, better coordination, and get this, the article even talks about outdated technology in some hospitals.
Really? In this day and age?
I know, right? It's kind of mind-blowing. But there's some good news here. There are things we can do as patients to, minimize our risk. Okay, I need to hear this because this is all making me a little nervous.
Well, for starters, never underestimate the power of asking questions.
Right, don't be afraid to speak up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have every right to understand what's happening with your body. Ask about the benefits and risks of any treatment, any medication, any procedure, and don't be afraid to ask about alternatives.
It's so easy to feel intimidated in those situations, but it's our health we're talking about.
Exactly. And never hesitate to get a second opinion.
Yeah.
Especially for big procedures or diagnoses. It's more common than you think.
That's a good reminder. I've also heard it's helpful to bring someone with you to appointments, like an advocate.
Absolutely. Having someone there to take notes, ask questions, be an extra set of ears, it can be so valuable.
Plus, it's just nice to have moral support, especially when you're feeling vulnerable.
And don't forget about technology. Health apps, personal medical records, they can be great tools for keeping track of medications, appointments, test results. It's all about staying organized and being proactive.
It really is empowering when you think about it. We're not powerless in all of this.
Not at all. We have a voice, and we have a responsibility to use it to advocate for our well-being. We are active participants in our healthcare journeys.
Well said. Okay, we've covered a lot today, but before we wrap up this deep dive, let's take a quick break. We'll be back with a final thought to leave you with. And we are back for our final few minutes of this deep dive into, well, I guess you could say the good, the bad, and the ugly of healthcare.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've talked about food, medications, medical errors, a lot to unpack.
It really has been eye-opening. But like you said earlier, knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. The more we know, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions about our health.
Couldn't agree more. So before we sign off today, any final thoughts for our listeners? Something to kind of marinate on?
Let me see. How about this? We've talked about the potential for misinformation, for industry influence, for human error, all these things that can impact our healthcare experiences. Knowing this, how can you become an even more informed and proactive advocate for your own well-being? What steps can you take starting today to really take charge of your health?
Wow, that's a powerful question. I know I'm walking away from this deep dive with a renewed commitment to asking more questions, doing my research, and you know what? I'm finally going to schedule that checkup I've been putting off.
That's fantastic. Those are great first steps. And remember, you are your own best advocate. Stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to ask those tough questions.
Love it. To our amazing listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for more eye-opening conversations.